Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Chris.
It's always a pleasure and an honor to get asked to do things like this. I want to thank John for asking me to, giving me an opportunity to come and talk about Bill Wilson. You know, tomorrow is the 75th anniversary, really, of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you know there may be people in this room that love Alcoholics Anonymous as much as me, but I don't think there's anybody in this room that loves it more than me. I would not be alive today. Alcohol was taking me out quick back in the late 80s, and you know I staggered my way back into Alcoholics Anonymous one more time with a desperation, just a willingness born of desperation, and I was able to struggle my way sober until I found the God-given program of recovery in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, this room is historic. I don't know if anybody was coming to these meetings when Mike and Kathy L. were part of this, but this is a historic meeting room. I have seen some of the giants of Alcoholics Anonymous speak in this room. Joe H., Mark H., Earl, I mean, you know, it goes on and on and on. It was some remarkable stuff. So, you know, this is a hallowed room as far as I'm concerned. And I really wish you all the best of luck with this meeting. I'm gonna start. This is a sentence out of the pamphlet that was written by Bill Wilson called Problems Other Than Alcohol. I want to read a sentence here. Sobriety, freedom from alcohol, through the teaching and practice of the 12 steps is the sole purpose of an AA group. Man, haven't we forgotten that one? I don't know what, you know, I love coming to meetings like this because this is a pocket of enthusiasm. They're serious about keeping alive the message of recovery. But if you've gone to some of the meetings I've gone to over the past 20 years, you'll wonder, you know, nobody was reading this because there wasn't much teaching and there wasn't much practice of the 12 steps going on in those meetings. They were basically bad Bob Newhart, dump all your crap, you know, sharing meetings. And I got to tell you, I'm like, what I believe today is there's a renaissance. People are going back to basics. They're studying the first decade of Alcoholics Anonymous when the sobriety rates were incredibly high. You had a really good chance of staying sober if you walked into AA and meant business back in the 40s. Those statistics, we're just, I don't believe we're doing, who's going to believe statistics in an anonymous fellowship? But I know what I see, and I see recidivism. I see people coming in and going out of Alcoholics Anonymous all the time, and I know that it wasn't like that in the early days. So this renaissance where people are getting back to the book. And they're getting back to the core recovery processes that were so successful in the early days. Meetings like this, I would support to my dying day. I really would. Because if you're a real alcoholic and you're in real trouble and you show up in this room, your chances of getting and staying sober and finding a path to recovery are going to be infinitely superior than if you go into a group where everybody just wants to update you on the current weekly drama in their life. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm going to get off the soapbox and I'm going to start doing what I was asked to do, which is to go through Bill's story. Bill's story. Anybody who understands historical studies understands one thing. You have to put in context the material you're studying. We can't make Bill Wilson, you know, our next door neighbor today in New Jersey. He came from a period of time that was different than the period of time we're living in right now. He was a World War I veteran. He came of age at the turn of the century. So there's a contextual difference in his perceptions of the world at that time. If you really, really want to get accurate when you do historical studies, you always have to put things in perspective. there's some great books over there. There's four biographies on Bill Wilson. I myself have read practically everything you can find on Bill Wilson. There was a period of time in the mid-90s where I did a ton of historical studies. I haven't done that in a long time, basically because, I'm more involved in practical application today than I am in historical studies, if that makes any sense. But I went through my period of time where I read all those books. I read everything I could on Bill Wilson. And I think I understand the man at least a little bit, at least as much as a 50-year-old man can in the year 2009. Bill was remarkable in a number of ways. One of them was he was a visionary. He saw the problems that Alcoholics Anonymous was going to have 10 years before we had the problems. He was working on the traditions. After the big book, he started working on the traditions because he knew that this fellowship was filled with alcoholics who were like selfish and self-centered and ego-driven and, maniacal, fanatical type of narcissistic maniacs. And he knew if you put rooms and rooms and rooms of them together, there's going to have to be ways that they're going to have to learn how to get along. So he started developing the traditions. And then around 1950-52, when the traditions were pushed through, he was already working on the concepts for world service. Because he also knew that if you put a number of alcoholics in service positions, every one of them is going to have a better idea than everybody else. And there's going to have to be ways that they can be exposed to the principles that will allow them to get along and get their job done. He was a visionary, and without Bill Wilson, there would be no AA today. If all we had was Dr. Bob, Alcoholics Anonymous would still be in Akron in the one meeting, okay? Bill was a power-driving, number one type of guy, and we're going to see a lot of this in here. And thank God that he was, because he did the promotional work, he did the groundwork, he interacted with the friends of Alcoholics Anonymous, the professionals. He put the book together. He was a principal architect of the book, and he got Alcoholics Anonymous off the ground. And if you know Bill like I know, you know that he did it for mixed motives. You know what I'm saying? Yes, he wanted to help us, but he also always wanted to be a number one man. And I'm going to start on Bill's story. This is from the original manuscript. The difference between the original manuscript and the book Alcoholics Anonymous is significant. I love studying the original manuscript. I had the opportunity to do an original manuscript study where we went through every word in the original manuscript, just like a regular big book study, only it was a manuscript study. And the changes in the original manuscript to the published first printing, first edition are significant. What happened was they put together the folio or the manuscript edition of the big book the way the alcoholics had agreed to it. Then they decided that they needed to pass this around to people of science, to people of religion, to people of psychiatry, so that they could get editors, so that they could get some feedback on. They were very, very afraid that they would alienate someone, or they would say something that would discredit them across a whole discipline. So what they did was they made sure they got buy-ins from professionals, and then the professionals made some suggestions. The editors per se made some suggestions, and those suggestions found their way into the first printing, first edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. So basically, outside influences already affected AA in the first printing, first edition. So I love it when we go back to the way the alcoholics had agreed on it. Is it a good thing that the changes were made? Probably, But I like going back to hearing the voice of the alcoholics in the original manuscript version. It's a lot more fun. At the age of 10, I went to live with my grandfather and grandmother. Their ancestors settled the section of Vermont in which I used to grow up. Bill came from a broken family. What happened was his father was a stone cutter, a marble cutter, and quite possibly not too morally coherent. And he left Bill and his sister and his mother to go off to Canada and Alaska and stuff to cut stone. Now, Bill's mother wanted to become a doctor, so Bill's mother left Bill with the grandparents while she went off and studied medicine. Now, modern psychological and psychiatric studies would show that this is a dysfunctional, broken home, and there's going to be effects that are going to be felt throughout the rest of your life if this kind of a thing happens to you. He was basically abandoned by his parents, and he went to live with his grandfather. Grandfather was a retired farmer and a lumberman. He nurtured me on a vigorous pioneering tradition. I see now that my grandfather was the kind of man who helped make America. Little did anyone guess I was to be of the war generation, which would squander the savings, the pioneering traditions, and the incredible stamina of your grandfather and mine. Ambitious but undisciplined that I was, there was a genius for postponing, evading, and skirting, but a certain dogged persistence drove me to succeed at special undertakings upon which my heart was set. How many of us can identify with this? How many of us are good starters? Aren't you like a good starter? And if you're really interested in something, you can kill that thing, whatever it is, right? Can't you? But I'll tell you what, doesn't every once in a while, doesn't your enthusiasm for a certain project or ambition just kind of disappear? I was a great starter. I joined the Boy Scouts. I went on one camping trip and quit. I took guitar lessons. I took 3 lessons, stole the guitar, and quit. I joined the wrestling team. I went to 1 practice. Okay, I went to college down in Florida. I got 6 credits. All because it stopped interesting me, and I moved on to something else. I kept shooting myself in the foot. I can relate to this. Especially did I revel in attacking the difficult or the impossible. Grandfather, for instance, said that no one but an Australian could make and throw a boomerang. No schoolwork was done, no woodbox filled, and little sleep was there until a boomerang had circled the church steeple, returning to almost decapitate him. Having accomplished this, my interest ceased. Okay? He had to prove he was a number 1 kind of guy, that he could do this. And I think his grandfather probably set him up. His grandfather probably said, "Hey, Bill, I bet you can't do this." Just to keep him busy and out of his hair for a while. So it was with my ambition to be a ball player, for I was finally elected captain of the team at a little seminary I attended after leaving country school. Someone told me I could never sing, so I took up voice until I had appeared in a recital. Then, as with the boomerang, my interest ended abruptly. I had commenced to fuss with the violin. This became such an obsession that athletics, schoolwork, and all else went by the board, much to everyone's consternation. I carried fiddling so far that I failed to graduate. I was most embarrassing, for I was president of the senior class. Wow. He also was a really bad fiddler. I've actually heard recordings of this. It's like, oh man, it would kill a chicken. Some of his playing. So collapsed the certain legend of infallibility I had built around myself. Repairing this failure, I attempted to enter a leading technical school. Because of fierce enthusiasms I had displayed for matters chemical and electrical, it was assured I was destined to become an engineer. At Boston, I failed the entrance examinations dismally. My people were heartbroken, and my self-sufficiency got another severe deflation. Finally, I commenced electrical engineering at an excellent military college where it was fervently hoped that I would get disciplined. No such thing happened. I have to make a correction in something I said earlier. This is not the Bill story from the original manuscript. This is probably a prior incarnation. John can probably tell you what it is. It was probably edited after this to be put in the original manuscript, and then it was edited to be put in the big book. As usual, I had good grades when interested, but often failed when not. That's me. I got to tell you, that's me. There was an illuminating instance concerning my calculus teacher. Not one formula would I learn until all of the theory underlying the subject was made clear. Wow. How many of us need to know why? Wow. Have we ever ever gone up to our sponsor and said, why do I have to take that step? Why do I have to make coffee? Why do I need to go to those meetings? Okay, we always need to know why. You know what? Knowing why in Alcoholics Anonymous is the booby prize. Okay? Knowing why, standing there asking why all the time is like the person who's on the Titanic and they're saying, get in the lifeboat. And the guy's saying, I'm not getting in the boat until I find out who the hell was responsible for watching for icebergs. You know what I mean? You need to know why. Well, you're going down. Don't worry about who was looking for icebergs. Just get in the boat with us, you know? That's what sponsors are trying to tell us all the time. Just get in the boat. At the library, I pored over the researches of Leibniz and Newton, whose genius made calculus possible. Loving controversy. Anybody here loves controversy? I argued much with my instructor, who quite properly gave me a 0, for I had solved only the first problem of the course. This guy's beautiful. He is a drink waiting to happen. Do you know that? Do you know that? In today's day and age, educational counselors and consultants can see this problem coming a mile away. They will say, substance abuse issues on the horizon. At this juncture, quite conveniently for me, the United States decided to go to war. How self-centered is that? You know, this is very convenient for me. A world war. We students bolted almost to a man for first officers training camp at Plattsburgh. I was commissioned a second lieutenant of artillery, electing that branch rather than aviation or infantry. For when I lay in my bunk at night, I had to confess I did not want to be killed. This suspicion of cowardice bothered me, for it couldn't be reconciled with the truly exalted patriotism which took possession when I hadn't had time to think. Later, under fire abroad, I was relieved to learn that I was like most men, scared enough but willing to see it through. I was assigned to a post on the New England coast. The place is famous for its Yankee trading and whaling traditions. 2 far-reaching events took place here. I married, had my first drink, and liked it. Can anybody in here remember the first time they had Coca-Cola? Or the first time they had a banana? I mean, no. Can you remember the first time you had a drink or got drunk? Absolutely. Isn't that a significant event in your life? Ask a non-alcoholic, when's the first time you ever had a beer? And they're probably not going to remember it. She represented a way of life for which I secretly longed. This guy was a bumpkin. Okay? Bill Wilson, you got to understand, he was a very intelligent bumpkin, but he was a bumpkin. I've seen where he grew up. The town still today has a general store gas station and a post office. That's it. Okay? There's a town 4 miles away, Manchester, where there was some stuff going on. But this guy grew up in the hills. And he longed for the city life. This was traditional with people back then. They'd see the moving pictures and they'd say, one day I'm going to the city. To be her kind meant fine houses, servants, gay dinners, cultivated conversation, and a much envied sophistication. I often felt a woeful lack of poise and polish. It's because he was a bumpkin. These inferiorities were later to drive me cityward in quest of success, as I suppose they have many a country boy. War fever ran high, and I was flattered that the first citizens of town took us into their homes and made me feel comfortable and heroic. Before they shipped these guys off, there was usually a lot of parties. And this is when he really started to experience alcohol. So here was love, applause, adventure, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last. Now, why was he part of life at last? Because all that emotional angst, all that not feeling comfortable with himself, feeling inferior, all that disappeared when he experienced alcohol. Does anybody relate to that? Did alcohol do for you what you couldn't do for yourself in those early days? Did it make it a little bit easier going to that party? The same thing was happening with Bill. My gaucheries and ineptitudes magically disappeared as I discovered the siphon and the Bronx cocktail. Strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink evaporated. Remember, he came from a time, this was a time of temperance. People were running around asking you to sign temperance pledges at the churches. They would bust into the bars and saloons, waving signs, Satan alcohol, and trying to get everybody to become a temperance pledger. So his people. Also, Bill's grandfather. I want to quick tell the story about Bill's grandfather. Bill's grandfather was an alcoholic. He had the white light experience. Here's what happened. He was a drinker like you wouldn't believe, drunk all the time. And he hated the church next door. Right next door to the Wilson house is a church. And he would mock out, the church. Look at those church people. He'd probably be like still drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning on Sunday, watching everybody dressed up in their sailor suits or whatever, going to church. And Bill heard all this criticism, and you're going to find it in his story. But what happened one day is the grandfather went on kind of like a little bit of a vision quest. And he decided to climb the mountain right out. There's a mountain right outside, and you'll see that in this story too. I forget the name of the mountain. But you can see it from Bill's bedroom window where he grew up. And his grandfather climbed up this mountain with a jug of booze. And he had an experience on the mountaintop. The same type of experience that Bill had with the wind of the Spirit blowing through him. And he came down off the mountain and never had another drink. And the first thing he headed for was the church. He pushed the preacher aside and he started talking about God. It was an amazing experience. Now Bill was around. Bill was around for some of this. I don't know if he was living there when his grandfather had this experience, but he was definitely living there when his grandfather was drinking. Then came parting with its bizarre mixture of sadness, high purpose, the strange elation which goes with adventure having fatal possibilities. Many of us sallied for over there. Loneliness seized me, only to be whisked away by my charming companion, Prince Alcohol. Did anybody in here have a relationship with alcohol? I mean, it might have been an unrequited love affair. I know it was for me. Alcohol was never true to me, because I always ended up in my own vomit somewhere or coming to in jail with a summons in my pocket. But I had a relationship with alcohol, especially toward the end. I saw it as my salvation, my emotional, mental, and spiritual salvation. I could not stand sobriety in my own head and in my own body toward the end. And I just wished I needed to be taken away. And the last couple of years of my drinking, I drank for oblivion. I did not drink for social interaction. I drank for oblivion. I wanted out of Chris and out fast. And it's typical of the alcoholic to develop a relationship with alcohol or their drug of choice or whatever. We were in England. I stood in Winchester Cathedral with head bowed in the presence of something I had never felt before. Winchester Cathedral is a spiritual experience. You don't have to be religious when you go in there. I mean, spirituality and the reverence of the divine is dripping from that place. Where now was the God of the preachers? Across the channels, thousands were perishing that day. Why did he not come? Suddenly, in that moment of darkness, he was there. I felt an enveloping, comforting presence. Tears stood in my eyes. I had glimpsed the great reality. Much moved, I wandered through the cathedral yard. My attention was caught by a dog roll on an old tombstone. Now, the difference between what Bill had in the cathedral and what Bill had later is the difference between a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening. A spiritual experience is something that can come over you and it can last, but it's not going to stay unless there's certain things that you do to keep that spiritual perspective. So we can all have spiritual experiences. I had quite a few of them on LSD. But they're not. But they didn't stay with me. They didn't change the way I thought and behaved moving forward. A spiritual awakening changes the way you think and you behave moving forward. So here, I've actually got a picture of this myself because I've got a friend in London who tracked this down and took a picture of it for me. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking small cold beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot whether he died by musket or by pot. So if you're in an AA group that basically says no talk about drugs, okay, it says right here in Bill's story that you can die by pot. So don't let anybody tell you can't mention drugs in the AA meeting. It's right in our big book. My mood changed. A squadron of fighters roared overhead. I cried to myself, here's to adventure. The feeling of being in the great presence disappeared. Yeah, there went his spiritual experience when an F-14, started shooting at him. Homecoming arrived at last. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I fancied myself a leader. For had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation? Leadership, I imagine, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the assurance of a great pipe organist at his stops and keys. Not too grandiose. Bill, even when he got sober, wanted to be the president. He didn't want to work for anybody. If he wasn't going to run it, he wanted nothing to do with it. And this lasted into his recovery, let me tell you. Soon enough I was brought to earth. A position at half the army pay from which I was presently discharged as poor and rebellious bookkeeper was the first salutation of unsentimental industry. My resentment was so great I nearly turned socialist, which in Vermont is downright treason. Humiliation and more came when my wife got a much better job and commenced to pay the bills. She was working at a department store. Bill couldn't get along. I mean, he was not consistent. Anybody out there understand inconsistencies? Have you ever been inconsistent with your job or had alcoholic employees who were inconsistent? They'd come in on Tuesday every week. He was inconsistent. I fancied my new friends were snickering at my predicament. Unwillingly, I had to admit that I was not trained for anything. Characteristically, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though drinking was not continuous, it frequently disturbed my wife. Now, what he means by not continuous is it means he wasn't drunk every waking moment. There were times that he was probably drinking every night by this time, but he wasn't continuously drunk. My wife had long talks when I would still her foreboding by saying men of genius conceived their vast proposals when jingled. That the most majestic constructions of philosophical thought were so derived. I used that one. That's a good one to use. Do you know that most great American novelists and most great philosophers and most great psychiatrists were all drunk when they thought up their most brilliant stuff? How about musicians? Most of the great rock and rollers were like smacked back during their best albums. I use that constantly. When the law course was done, I knew the profession was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of the street, Wall Street, had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Reminiscent of the boomerang episode, I became wholly absorbed and fascinated. Out of this tissue of drink and speculation, I combined to forge the weapon that one day would turn in its flight and all but cut me to ribbons. Both at work and living modestly, my wife and I saved $1,000. It went into utility stocks, then cheap and unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have a great rise. Now, the type of stock market investing that happened back then is basically, it's not like it is today. You could buy stock for a certain percentage. Let's say you wanted to buy 100 shares of utility stock. You could put $10 down on those. Okay, and if the stock price went up, you could sell them. You could sell them all and make a ton of money. So you would basically do this, speculating that they would go up. This is part of the problem that led to the financial meltdown in the late 20s. Failing to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, my wife and I decided to go anyhow. I had a theory people lost money in stocks not by knowing markets, managements, and the ideas at work in a given situation. I was discover a lot more reasons later on. What Bill did was he became one of the first stock analysts that ever existed. He talked some people, he had to get out of town anyway. That's not what he's telling you. But anybody in here ever have to get out of town? He talked some people into believing that he could go and actually investigate these companies that people were investing in and really get an insider's view on what's going on in these companies. And you know how he would do it? Let's say you worked at GM and he was going to investigate GM. He'd go to the bars where all the GM workers would go after work, and he'd drink with these people. And he'd start asking them questions, and then the next day he'd write up reports based on the information he would get from his drinking buddies. And by putting all these portfolios together, he went back to Wall Street, and he basically made a case that if you know more about these companies, you're making a safer investment. And he talked a number of these people into this. And he gained a reputation basically by being one of the first analysts of companies to write reports for investment firms. We quit our positions and off we romped on a motorcycle and a sidecar stuffed with a tent, blankets, change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. Our friends almost wanted a lunacy commission appointed. Perhaps they were right. There had been some successes at speculation. Yeah, his $1,000 on utility stocks, probably it. So we had a little money, though we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our capital. It was the last honest manual work for the rest of his life. The whole eastern United States was covered in a year. At the end of it, strangely enough, my report sent back to Wall Street procured for me a position there and the use of what seemed to me a large sum of money. The exercise of an option brought in more money and we had several $1,000s profit. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was soothing and swelling. Another thing you have to know is the boom of the late 20s. You had to be a moron not to make money back then. I mean, really, everybody was doing really, really well, and then the bubble burst. Anybody understand what it means to have a bubble burst? I think we do today, don't we? Housing bubble. Okay, everybody was making money on properties 5 years ago. You'd have to be a moron not to make money on properties 5 years ago, buying and selling. But what happens? Sometimes there's a bubble. Drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. Loud talk in the jazz places uptown. We spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. Of course they didn't, and I made a host of fair-weather friends. My drinking had assumed more serious proportions, going on all day and nearly every night. Remonstrance of my cooler associates terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf, a drunken lone wolf. There were many unhappy scenes in our apartment. This, by the way, was large, for I had rented 2 and had the wall between knocked out. Here's the one thing that I hesitate to believe, I'm afraid. There had been no great infidelity. No great infidelity. In the big book it says no infidelity. All right, maybe I believe this. Loyalty to my wife and sometimes extreme drunkenness kept me out of those scrapes. There's a couple of books over here I'll point people's attention to if they believe that. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. This is a terrible illness. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud while I overtook Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen was basically the Tiger Woods of the day. Poor Tiger. Golf permitted drinking both by day and night. It was fun to roam around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan seen upon the well-to-do. With amused skepticism, the local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till. Abruptly, in October 29, the whirling movement ceased. Hell had broken loose in the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape. It bore the inscription PKF 32. It had been 52 that morning. You have to understand, when you buy in a 5 or a 10% margin, a loss of 10 puts you in bankruptcy. Because they call that stock on you. So that's what ruined all these guys. I was done, and so were many friends. The papers said that men were already jumping to death from those towers of Babel that were high finance. That disgusted me. Going back to the bar, I felt glad I would not jump. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock, so what? Tomorrow was another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination to win came back. Sometimes you go to the bar and you're feeling low. The hounds of hell are biting at your ass. I mean, the family wants to kill you. Your boss is upset. You're not getting along with your neighbors. Your kids are trouble. And you sit down at the bar and you start drinking. And slowly, doesn't your perspective change a little bit? Sometimes about 5 or 6 drinks in, you're like, who cares about you? I got real ambitions here to work on. I mean, it's the insanity of alcoholism is just remarkable. Next morning, I called a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left, so he thought I had better come up. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. It was like Napoleon returning from Elba. No St. Helena for me. But I soon excelled as a serious and frivolous drinker, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. He had to sign a contract with this guy, because the guy knew his reputation. If you take so much as 1 drink of alcohol, you're losing your job, you're losing your money, you're losing your home. Okay, I'll sign. Where do I sign? Do you think signing something like that is going to keep the real alcoholic from drinking? Not a chance in hell. That's the difference between a real alcoholic and a heavy drinker. If a heavy drinker has sufficient reason or desire to stop or moderate, they can. An alcoholic, at times, has no mental defense against the next drink. This is what separates Bill from a heavy drinker. We went to live with my parents-in-law. I found a job, then lost it through a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one knew I was to have no real employment for 5 years, nor hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became a hanger-on at brokerage places, less and less desired because of my habits. This guy became a pathetic creature. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. Bathtub gin was basically distilled alcohol, grain alcohol that you could get from doctors, mixed with distilled water with some, what did they use? There was a type of thing that they jammed in it. God damn it, I can't forget it now. It's like pine needles, and that's what you'd make bathtub gin out of. So not too many baths would he be taking either. Sometimes a small deal would net me a few $100s, and I would pay the bars and delicatessens. Endlessly this went on. I began to wake early, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin followed by half a dozen bottles of beer would be required if I ate any breakfast. I still thought I could control the situation. There were periods of sobriety which would renew my wife's hope. He would go in and out of Towns Hospital. He was in and out of there, I don't know, a dozen times. And he would stay sober for a period of time. It might be a day, it might be a week, it might be a couple of months. But he always got drunk again. But things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife became ill, as did my father-in-law. Then I had a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point in 32, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not even take 1 drink. You ever hear in the meetings, I just don't take the first drink no matter what?
Yeah.
Bill knew that a long time before he was able to stop drinking.
Yeah.
Knowing the first drink is going to get you drunk is not a sufficient defense against getting drunk, unless you're a heavy drinker. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. He used to sign in the family Bible, I swear to God and Jesus Christ that I will never again put another drop of alcohol in my body. I am done. And then after he got drunk and went back to the Bible, he said, this time I really mean it. I am really done this time. If you see, you can see this Bible. It's in archives. It's just pathetic. He would keep writing, and he meant it. He meant it. Every single time he meant it with every fiber of his being that he was going to never drink again. If you would have put a lie detector test on him while he was signing that Bible, it would have shown that he was telling the truth. He was never going to drink again. What he found out later in Towns Hospital was the obsession of the mind doesn't care if you don't want to drink or not. The obsession of the mind is going to get you to drink. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder. For such an appalling lack of perspective became near being just that. Here's the story of one of the last drunks that he did. He'd been sober for months, and he was out at the golf course getting that impeccable coat of tan, overtaking Walter Hagen. And he'd been sober for months. He'd been detoxed, and he knew all about alcohol and all about not taking the first drink. And he went to the bar to have a sandwich at this club. And he started talking to the bartender, and he said, bartender, I need to tell you, I'm an alcoholic. And he started telling him all of his story, how drink ruined him. It ruined him on Wall Street. It ruined him, how he was like drinking constantly, bathtub gin, in and out of the hospitals, completely insane, fallen short across the board for his family and his business associates, and he'd stopped drinking. And the bartender's like, wow, that is really something. I gotta hand it to you. You really must have some real moral fiber to just walk away from alcohol like that. And Bill was like, yeah, I really, let me have a double. And the bartender looked at him like, are you insane? After everything you just told me, you're ordering a drink? And you know what he said? He said, yeah, I guess I'm insane. Make it a triple. Okay, this is how alcoholism presents. It presents with a subtle form of insanity, a strange mental blank spot that precedes the first drink. We don't have a defense, a human defense, against putting alcohol back in our body. 90% of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous misunderstand that. Let alone the people that treat us for it and the people that are out there in the world that we deal with day in, day out. To understand powerlessness, you need to be able to experience it. How many of you have experienced powerlessness? You really meant you were never going to drink again. You really, really meant it. You really, 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 really meant it. And you ended up drunk again. What is that? What is that? That's the powerlessness we admit to in the first step. When you hear in the rooms, I just don't take a drink no matter what, even if my ass falls off, I gotta tell you, that's a complete, you can't even take the first step if you say something like that. But let's forget that. I gotta tell you, I'm a very sensitive alcoholic, and at least 2 weeks before my ass falls off, I'm drinking. Because I ain't going to walk around sober with my ass hanging on the ground. You know what I mean? Sticking to my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed. Confidence began to be replaced with cocksureness. I could laugh at the bars. Now I had what it takes. Every single person that you sponsor is going to have this type of an attitude. You're overreacting to a situation I have under control. All right? Alcoholism is an illness of minimization. It's a minimization. you'll go up and you'll be doing the first step with somebody, and you'll say, well, you understand you have a mental obsession that'll drag you, without a spiritual awakening, it will drag you back into the pits of alcoholic hell. You understand that, right? Yeah. And you understand that you've got an allergy to the body that once alcohol is in you, you're going to have little or no control over the amount you take, and it's going to drag your ass through the mud for however long it's going to drag your ass through the mud. You understand that, right? Yeah. And you understand that one of the parts of the first step is unmanageability. Unmanageability presents emotionally, it presents mentally, it presents in your personal relationship, it presents in your physical health, it presents in you being able to show up or be the type of person you want to be, it presents in car crashes, it presents in jails, institutions, and death. You understand that, right? Yeah. Well, I want you over my house Tuesday night. We're going to start working through the steps in the Big Book.
Great.
Oh, wow, man. Tuesday? Oh, Tuesday. Friends is on. It's the season finale of Friends. I never miss Friends. You're dying. What don't you get? What don't you get? This happens every single time because it's an illness. Inherent in the illness alcoholism is the inability to accurately assess how much trouble you're in. You can't access it. You minimize. Yeah, I'm vomiting blood, and I just got up from a grand mal seizure, but going to rehab. You know what I mean? I don't think so. I got it under control. One day I walked into a place to telephone. In no time I was beating the bar, asking myself how it had happened. This has happened to me. I have beat the bar and said, how the hell am I drinking again? I made a decision not to drink. How the hell am I drinking again? And listen, the people who come in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, I want you to consider something. The people who come in and they relapse and they come back and they relapse and they come back and they relapse and they come back, I want you to consider that they're actually real alcoholics. I want you to consider that for a minute, and I want you to consider that they're not just not being honest, and they're not just not really trying. They have no adequate mental defense against the first drink, and unless they go through the steps and get a spiritual awakening, they are going to continue to relapse. I would like you to consider that. Okay, because too many people are dying in Alcoholics Anonymous today because people misunderstand what alcoholism is. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then. I did just that. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning is unforgettable. Anybody ever wake up with the hideous four horsemen running through your room? Terror, frustration, bewilderment, despair? You ever touch that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization when you come out of one more tear? Do you know that suicide is 60 times more prevalent in alcoholics than it is in non-alcoholics? We're 60 times more likely to kill ourselves than a non-alcoholic. 40% homicidal? All right. Let's not say 60, let's then say 40. Good God. Good God. Here's another statistic for you, and I'm throwing this out, and it has nothing to do with what I'm reading. 52% of us who get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous for the long haul will die of nicotine misuse. Nicotine misuse kills most of us after we get sober. And we'll have a smoking break in 5 minutes. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably. There was a terrible sense of impending calamity. And that's usually because calamity is actually impending. I hardly dare cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarce daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My reading nerves were stilled at last. The morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so would I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was the hard thought. Should I kill myself? Anybody in here ever ask yourself that question? Raise your hand. Be honest. This is being recorded, so let it be shown that at least half of the 600 people here tonight raised their hand. No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that, 2 bottles, and oblivion. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 years more. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse, and then the morning terror and madness were on me. Again I swayed dizzily before an open window, or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from the city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. He lived in a multiple family brownstone. He was afraid he was going to jump through the window to kill himself, so he took his mattress and dragged it down the stairs and slept down on a stairwell, down on the first floor. Much to his neighbor's consternation, I'm sure. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative with the usual penalty. Anybody in here drink and sedate yourself at the same time? Raise your hand if you're honest. You are damn right. I had a bottle of Xanax and I wouldn't even count them. I'd weigh them out in my hand and it said no alcohol on that bottle. And I drank a half a gallon of whiskey with it every night. And I got to tell you, I was limber. You know what I mean? I was noodled by about 8 o'clock at night. I had no furniture left after that prescription ran out. This combination soon landed me on the rocks, and my wife saw something had to be done quickly. People feared for my sanity, and so did I. When drinking, which was almost always, I could eat little or nothing. I was 40 pounds underweight. My brother-in-law is a physician. Through his kindness, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. This is Towns Hospital. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Has anybody in here ever done belladonna? No. Some idiot brought some to school when I was in high school and said, "Hey man, it's belladonna, man, it's cool." And like always back then, I'd grab it, eat it, and then say, "Well, what does it do?" You know what I mean? I ate belladonna with about a dozen other people, and we literally went 90% blind that day. Wow. It was a terrible, awful, hallucinogenic kind of a feeling, and you couldn't see. And we all showed up at the smoking area next day going, "Hey man, did you go blind too? Wasn't that cool?" I got anybody that would do belladonna to treat alcoholism with belladonna is insane. And hydrotherapy, they would basically roll you in on a gurney with multiple shower heads and hit you with hot water, cold water, hot water, cold water. You know, treatment protocols were not very advanced, I guess, in the late 30s. Good God! At least you have a clean alcoholic. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though selfish and foolish, I had also been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. William D. Silkworth, thank God for this man. He had treated thousands of alcoholics, and some patterns had evolved in his observations. He understood some things about the hopeless alcoholic. Okay? He also understood that treatment works for some people. The same thing today. Treatment centers can turn out winners if you're a heavy drinker, or if you're in there for a DUI, or there was an intervention at work because you grabbed the boss's wife's ass during a Christmas party or something. Treatment centers are going to turn out winners. But he also understood that treatment centers can't recover somebody. And the people who he considered real alcoholics, he considered hopeless, and he knew they were going to die, and he would tell the families, "Hey, this guy's going to last maybe 6 months, maybe 2 years. Buy your gravestone while it's cheap." That's basically what he was telling the family. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholism, the will is amazingly weakened concerning drink, though frequently remaining strong in other respects. That's the obsession of the mind. My incredible behavior in face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and made a little money. Surely this was the answer. Self-knowledge. Treatment is about discovery. Most treatment is about discovery. Understand that. What is discovery? Self-knowledge. Self-knowledge ain't going to keep you sober. You get recovery in rooms like this. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, so it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with a heart failure during delirium tremens. Or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. All good news to hear. She would soon give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. It was not necessary to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge out into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness, after all, what I would not give to make amends. That career that I'd set my heart upon, that pleasant vista, was shut out forever. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Has anybody in here ever been in the bitter morass of self-pity? What a wonderful place that is to be. Remember that, and use it for motivation to continue to maintain, to participate in the maintenance of your spiritual condition, please. Quicksand underlay me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. King Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the place of broken man. Fear sobered me up a bit. Then came that insidious insanity of the first drink. Again, the second step says, a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. That's what they're talking about. That obsession of the mind that the hopeless alcoholic always has. And on Armistice Day in 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before morning comes. In reality, this was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. You want to really screw up an AA meeting, when they ask for a topic, say, could anybody in here share their experience of being in the fourth dimension of existence? I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction. I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of beer near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. I'm going to stop here. This is basically, you can look at Bill's story as the first 8 pages are what it was like, and a little bit of what happened. The second 8 pages are a little bit of what happened and what it's like today. The first 8 pages are the illness. The second 8 pages are the recovery. That's a good way to look at Bill's story. I want to thank John again for asking me here. I ran it right out to the minute. Thanks for having me here today. Good evening, everybody. My name is Chris, and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Chris.
Very, very grateful to be here tonight. And this has been an incredibly interesting commitment for me, because it really is the first time I've been exposed to this draft of Bill's story. And again, it predates the edited version that ended up in the original manuscript, and that predated the version that ended up in the first printing, first edition of the Big Book. So I always believe it's interesting to go back to the earliest layer of any tradition. If you want to study religion, what you do the same thing. You go back to the earliest layer of tradition in that religion to really see what's going on. Because what happens is, over the course of time, over the course of years, over the course of more and more literature being published, more and more layers of strata get put on top. And sometimes it's difficult to really get to the actual truth about what was going on during that period of time of miracles. And the first 4 years or so, 5, 6 years of Alcoholics Anonymous was a time of miracles. People who had suffered utter destitution were being raised up and reborn and became recovered alcoholics and were able to move on with their life. These were people that were pitiful, pathetic drunks. They were absolutely considered hopeless
by anybody in medicine, anywhere. So it was a time of miracles, and we're getting a bird's eye view of that in this particular story. Now, before we get going on that, I want to read two sentences from the 12 and 12. This comes from Tradition 9. Why it's in Tradition 9, I don't know. But it's, I think, one of the most important two sentences in this book, the 12 and 12. Unless each AA member follows to the best of his ability our suggested 12 steps to recovery, he almost certainly signs his own death warrant. His drunkenness and dissolution are not penalties inflicted by people in authority. They result from his personal disobedience to spiritual principles. If you relapse, it's because of your personal disobedience to spiritual principles. It is not usually because of the reason that you come up with, like she left me, or he left me, or I lost my job. No, it's because you have personally rejected spiritual principles. And that's that. What we're going to see in the second half of Bill's story is how Bill recovered, how he became a recovered alcoholic. Many things were at work in the early days. He was exposed to a number of Oxford Group people, number one of which was Sam Shoemaker. But he was also exposed to Henrietta Seiberling and Ann Smith, who were also very, very advanced in the Oxford Group program. So he was basically being exposed to the spiritual principles that if we disobey, we're going to get drunk. He was being exposed to them. He was desperate enough to accept them in his life. And what happened was he recovered and decided to spend the rest of his life carrying the message of that discovery that spiritual principles will solve his alcohol problem. He decided that he would spend the rest of his life carrying that message. And every single one of us in this room should be incredibly grateful that he did that. Because there were a lot of people that recovered from alcoholism around the same time as Bill Wilson who did not decide to do that. They said, thank you for this, I'm getting on with my affairs. He decided that he was never going to work a day in his life again and just carry this message. And you know what? He did not live. He did not live a life with a lot of material possessions or a lot of money, but he lived a life with one hell of a lot of spiritual gifts being placed at his feet because he did that. Now, again, the first half of Bill's story is what it was like and a little bit about what happened. The second half of his story is a little bit about what happened and what it's like today. It's about the recovery process. So let's look at this as, let's look at the line of demarcation where we stopped last week. And now we're going to pick up on what happened and how he recovered. Remember that he was sitting there drinking himself to death. All right, he's in this tiny little room in a terrible apartment somewhere in New York City, and he's drinking himself to death. He hasn't even tried to work in years. He knows he can't. All he can do is drink and keep that demon at bay 1 minute at a time. That alcoholic obsession, that compulsion to drink. So there he is, and all of a sudden his telephone rings. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. This was one of Bill's drinking buddies. You know how we seek lower and lower companions as we sink lower and lower ourselves? You know, and we party with the people that party like us? This was one of those guys. He had been committed for alcoholic insanity. Back in the day, they could commit you. If you got a couple of signatures on a piece of paper, you could be committed away. To the booby hatch you go. You know, you could, and this guy was actually committed for insanity. So rumor had it. I wondered how he had escaped. Escaped what? The hatch. Of course he would have dinner. Then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. This was a beautiful story. This is back when he could actually get out of the house and drink. What had happened was the first airport for Manchester I think it was Manchester, was going to be dedicated like on Sunday. They were going to have the opening dedication, with the mayor and everything. And Bill decides to hell with, the first airplane was going to land, okay? He says, to hell with that, let's charter a plane. They're drunk out of their minds. And let's go land on that airport. So sure enough, here comes this airplane landing on the airport the day before it was going to get dedicated by the mayor. And the marching band was there practicing, and they're looking, and all of a sudden he lands, and they fall out of the plane drunk. They can't even walk. This is the type of stuff he would do with his buddy Ebby, who is who we're talking about. Another glass stirred my fancy. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door open. I was drinking myself to death back in the mid-'80s. I was at my mother's house just because she wouldn't throw me out. And I couldn't leave the house and drink. I'd get arrested. So I would just buy bottles and drink, a shivering denizen of, the second story of my mother's house. And I'd just sit there and drink. And every once in a while, an old friend would call up and say, I'm coming over. And I'd be like, yeah, how cool. They'd never come over again, I could tell you, because I drank like it was my job, and they're just like, oh my God, this guy's drunk out of his mind, and so they would never come back. But every once in a while that would happen, so I know how he feels. He stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. You ever seen the lights go on in like a newcomer who's maybe gone through the steps, or all of a sudden they get it? All of a sudden the lights come on upstairs. That's an awakening. That's a spiritual experience. And he saw Ebby like he'd never seen him before. This guy was... Listen, I went back to my boss to make amends about 4 years after I quit drinking. And he looked at me and he goes, Chris, you're a young guy. That's what he said. I looked 10 years younger 4 years later because I was healthy, and he couldn't even believe I was the same person. He knew I was, but he couldn't believe it. What happened? I pushed the drink across the table. Not now, he said. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's this all about? I queried. He looked straight at me. Simply but smilingly, he said, I got religion. This was the message of the early alcoholics back in the day when they were working in Oxford Group Program. If you look in the back there, one of the quotes from William James is, the only cure for inebriatism is religiosism. And that's what they thought at the turn of the century, because the only hopeless alcoholics that were getting sober were the people that were engaging in these evangelical fellowships that just swoop you in, and they were almost cult-like. Every single night they had something for you to do. And those were the only alcoholics that were getting sober. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. But he had that starry-eyed look. The old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer, but he did no ranting. In quite a matter of fact of way, he related how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. What happened with Ebby was, I'm not sure if I talked about this last week or not, but what happened was, he got sent off to his summer house up in Vermont because his family wanted nothing more. He embarrassed the hell out of his family. And this one day, he drove his car into a kitchen of these people, okay? And when they came downstairs, like, oh my God, there's a car in the kitchen. He rolled his window down and said, hey, you got any coffee? He was very unconcerned that his Pontiac was in their kitchen. So the judge was upset. But the second thing that happened was he was painting the house. Pigeons were landing on the house, and he had a resentment against those pigeons. So he took out his shotgun and started blowing the pigeons off the side of the house with his shotgun. And this was in a very confined residential neighborhood, much to the neighbor's chagrin. So they called the police, and this was it. This was it. The judge was going to put him away. However, Roland Hazard was friends with the judge, had gotten sober in the Oxford group, and said, I'll tell you what, instead of locking him away, release him to my recognizance. I'll take him to New York. There's a cure for alcoholism. It's in the Oxford group. I'll get him away from here. And the judge said, okay, I won't lock him up, but I never want to see this guy again. Get him out of here. So now Ebby Thatcher is wandering around New York. He's got it. He did the Oxford group. He's had the spiritual awakening, and he's looking around for somebody to witness to, and he decides to call up Bill Wilson. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. All right, I'm going to stop here. This is the Oxford group's, basically the Oxford group's big book. This is one of the pieces of literature that was very, very important to the early alcoholics prior to the writing of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It was called What is the Oxford Group? And it was handed out to people joining the Oxford Group so they could understand what the hell the Oxford Group was. And it was written by the layman with a notebook. So he wanted to remain anonymous. Maybe this was where they got the idea to remain anonymous with the big book. All I'm going to do is read the contents section of this. And ask yourself, does this ring a bell as far as our 12 steps are concerned? Okay? Sin. That's the first chapter. Sharing for confession and witness. Surrender. Restitution. Guidance. And then there's the 4 absolutes, which the early AAs used with their guidance. That anything that they were going to do, they put them up against absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, to see if it was a guided thought, if it was what they would think God would want them to do. Now, sin, that's basically what they considered sin was missing the mark. Okay, we can see that basically as step 1. What are the causes and conditions of our failure at life? Why are we missing the mark? Why are we alcoholic? Sharing for confession and witness, that can basically be the 5th step. Surrender, that can basically be the 2nd and the 3rd step. Restitution, that can be the 8th and the 9th step. Guidance can be the 10th and the 11th step. So this was an early picture of the architecture of a recovery process in the Oxford Group. This is what he explained to Bill Wilson over that kitchen table. That was the religious idea and a practical program of action. That was months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. The sound of the preacher's voice, which one could hear on still Sundays, way over there on the hillside, that pro-offered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died, such recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back to me. He was being exposed in his alcoholic destitution. He was being exposed to religious and spiritual principles once again. But there was something about Ebby that got him to listen. Ebby wasn't drinking anymore. He was a changed person. He was probably going to survive. And Bill even thought that Ebby was a worse drinker than he was. In a power greater than myself, I had always believed. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in an illogical proposition, that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. If you study these early scientific people that were coming of age during this period of time, you'll see that most of them had a belief in God. Science and religion have done this over the years. They've come together, they've gone apart. They've come together, they've gone apart. Right now, we're in a period of time where cosmologists and physicists, some of the top-level people, are coming back together with the idea of God. Some of these people have come to the conclusion that existence, as it is now, from the Big Bang to us sitting here in this room, could not have happened by just mere physical coincidence. There had to be an idea involved, a divine intelligence of one form or another. And these are top-level physicists. So back in the day, some of his heroes, even Darwin believed in God. And people use Darwin's work to say there is no God, but Darwin was a believer. So a lot of his intellectual heroes believed in God, but they didn't believe in the religious type of God. They believed in divine intelligence. They believed in creationism, or as some people believe today. Despite contraindications, I had little doubt that a might, purpose, and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, which knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. With preachers and the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. How many people in here have had prejudice against organized religion or people in organized religion? Let the record show half the hands of all 275 people here tonight have had such prejudices, okay? Now, Bill and Dr. Bob were two different kinds of people. Dr. Bob went back to church and you could find him in the same pew every single day till the day he died. He went right back in and journed up. Okay? Bill had a hard time joining up. He took instruction from a Catholic priest. He took instruction from an Episcopal minister. He took instruction from a lot of people and came this close to joining the Catholic Church and balked. For the rest of his life, he had issues with organized religion. This did not stop him from recovering. It makes little difference whether you go back to church. It's probably preferable, but it makes little difference. This is a spiritual program. I still have issues with certain functions of organized religion. I believe I've gotten rid of most of my prejudice, if not all of it. And I believe that they do way more good than they do harm. And you have to understand that organized religion has human beings in it. How are there not going to be human beings with faults? So there's going to be faulty, religious systems sometimes. That's okay. I've never been a joiner. I've got many, many friends. I sponsor priests. I've got many, many friends who are real faith-based people, and every single Sunday, without fail, they are in there. And that's absolutely wonderful. But there are some people who still can't really make that leap into religion. However, that does not mean they're not really, really spiritual. And it's the spiritual principles that are going to keep us sober. Of Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too much followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. This is so me, I read the Bible when I was drinking, and I was looking for answers because there was a hole in me. There was a spiritual vacuum in me, and I was trying to find something that'll give me some comfort. And I recognized the teaching of Jesus was completely alien to most religions. You know, if the religions would actually do what Jesus told them to do, they wouldn't be able to have churches. You know, and I had a lot of contradictions and a lot of issues with all of this. So I relate to this guy. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. What are most wars based on? My Jesus is different than your Jesus. That's what practically every war in the world is based on. I honestly doubted whether the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed boss universal, and he certainly had me. You know, one of the problems with religion, and one of the problems that we all have with God, is the problem of pain. The problem of suffering. I want to tell a little story. A bunch of Jewish people would have Jewish services in one of the concentration camps in Germany. And this is while millions of them are being decimated and murdered. They're having their religious meetings. And one day they were just so upset with God that they decided they were going to put God on trial. And they put God on trial, and they found him guilty of negligent homicide, not intervening in human affairs to stop this slaughter. And they found him guilty. What do you think they did right after the trial? They went into their prayer group. Do you know what I'm saying? You know, they went and they went right on with their devotional practices. A lot of us have that problem with pain. And each of us have to come to terms with that somehow. Each of us have to come to terms with that somehow to move forward. You know, I've done it in my way. You may have to do that in your way, or you may have done that in your way. But I don't believe God causes this pain. You know, I don't believe the earthquake. You know, God said, you know, I really can't stand Southern California. I think I'm going to quake their ass. You know, I just don't believe in that type of God. Or you know, I think I'm going to give that Schroeder guy cancer and, you know, let his neighbor, you know, live to 90. I just don't believe that. I believe that there's something deeper at work, and we all need to come to terms with that. That's part of our spiritual growth. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. He had tried to quit drinking many, many times. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. I think he actually escaped. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. In effect, he had been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. That's a promise in our book. Your life is going to be better than the best you've ever known if you engage in this spiritual work. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table, straight out of the here and now. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. It went deeper than that. He was on a completely different footing. His roots grasped new soil. He was reborn. They talk in the book Alcoholism about being reborn. And that's, you think differently and you act differently. You know, you have a personality change sufficient to recover from alcoholism. And here sat Ebby with this personality change across from Bill. And Bill is like, man, you know, he at the very least wanted to know what the heck happened to this guy. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want Him enough. There's our part in the recovery process and there's God's part. There's a beautiful line in the 12 and 12 that says, God will not render us white as snow without our cooperation. How then shall we cooperate? the architecture of the 12 steps answers that question. That's how we cooperate. That's how we place ourselves in the spiritual environment where God can take us from a pathetic wretch to a reborn individual. We have to participate. We have to place ourselves in that spiritual climate. But if we do so, the sunlight of the Spirit will shine down on us and we'll be taken care of. In the 12 and 12, in the first step, there's a great line. And the line basically is, who among us wishes to admit complete defeat? Glass in hand, we've warped ourselves and our minds to such a state that only an act of divine providence can relieve us of our obsession. What is divine providence? That's the sunlight of the Spirit coming out of heaven on your ass is what it is. That is what it is. Okay? The craziest thing I ever see is when I see a big book in the self-help section. This isn't a self-help program. This is a divine help program. And all we need to do is rightly relate ourselves and practice spiritual principles. That places us in the spiritual climate where God can do God's work. There are certain things that God can do. And there's certain things that He cannot or will not. So we need to find out what's going to work, and then we need to grab onto it. Like the drowning sees a life preserver. At long last I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There was a humble willingness to have Him with me, and He came. But soon the sense of His presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly within myself. So it had been ever since. It was simple as that. How blind I had been. He touched the divine. As alcoholics, we all want to experience oneness with the divine. That's why we drink. That's why we do heroin. That's why we do crack. We want to feel a touch of the divine. He felt a little bit of it in the Winchester Cathedral, but he didn't do anything. He walked out of that church and he went about his life and he started shooting Germans and whatever else he did. And, it just got blotted out by the worldly clamors. At the hospital, I was separated from king alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise then, for I showed signs of delirium when I stopped drinking. Anybody in here ever experienced delirium tremens? Ho! Those are not fun, are they? Oh, whoa! That is utter destitution. That is pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. That is the hideous four horsemen riding over your head. Terror, frustration, bewilderment, despair, panic, fear, terror. That's what the delirium tremens are. And listen, if you do leave this room and ever drink again and experience those delirium tremens, you need medical attention. Yeah. You need medical attention. Because here's the statistic. 15% of alcoholics get to a point where they suffer delirium tremens. It's the low bottom alcoholics experience delirium tremens. And 15% of the time you have a delirium tremens, you die from it. Yeah. So important warning sign. Okay, so right here in the hospital, now I want to explain this very, very clearly. These steps, which were the Oxford group processes, were taken on the hospital bed while he was detoxing. If somebody comes up to you and says, oh man, you shouldn't do that fourth step until you have 4 years, move as fast as you can away from an individual like that. That's not how they work this. They work this fast and furious, okay? That's how they did it back in the day. Yes, there's no time limit on all this, but if you'll see, these steps were taken while he was still on his detox bed, all except for 9 and 12. There I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood Him, to do with me as He would. Sounds a little like the third step prayer, doesn't it? Yep. I placed myself unreservedly under His care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without Him I was lost. Sounds a little like our first step, doesn't it? A first step admission of defeat. I ruthlessly faced my sins of omission and commission and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. That really sounds like step 4 through step 7, doesn't it? My schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. That sounds a bit like step 5. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. Sounds a little like 8. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Little like step 9, doesn't it? I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as He would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except where my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. A little bit like step 10, but a whole lot like step 11, isn't it? My friend promised that when those things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of life which answered all my problems. Every single person that walks through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous has two things about them that I'm going to share that they don't think they have. They're not going to believe. Number one is that they're in way more trouble than they think they are. Every single time they are minimizing like a sumbitch. Okay? The second thing is they're not giving the processes of Alcoholics Anonymous enough credit. Because the processes of Alcoholics Anonymous, they may think, well, maybe I'll be able to quit drinking. How about maybe you'll have, not only that, but you'll have a better life than anything you could have imagined prior to walking through the doors of AA. You know, nobody walking through the doors of AA is thinking that. Belief in the power of God plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. These are essential requirements for recovery. If you don't have these in your life and you drink again, do not blame Alcoholics Anonymous. Do not wander around the bar saying, I went to A&A and it didn't work for me. Okay? We don't need the black eye. Okay? We don't need the black eye. If you don't do these things, you don't practice the recovery process. Do not be fooled by people that try to lock you into fellowship-based sobriety. That is short-changing you. There's more available. There's more available. There's 3 types of drinkers usually in the bar. 30% of them are sitting there drinking and they're crying in their beer. They're like, oh. Okay, 30% of the people are wandering around trying to pick people up. They get real amorous, you know, and they're like hitting and hustling. But 30% of those people want more out of alcohol, so they're running around trying to get cocaine, or they're running into the city, or they're just I want to go to Manhattan, and they're running around. Let's do this, let's do that, because they want more out of alcohol. That's how we're supposed to approach this program of recovery. I want more than sobriety. I want recovery. Be one of those people. Because you can go to the ocean with a thimble, or you can go to the ocean with a bathtub. It's going to get filled. You might as well go there with a bathtub. You know what I'm saying? Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It really meant the obliteration of self. I had to quit playing God. This is all third step stuff. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. This is the guidance piece of the 11th step. If you want to learn about how they did the 11th step, there's some great material in the back. One of the great pamphlets, I don't know if we have one here, is How to Listen to God. John, do we have that here? How to Listen to God. I don't remember who wrote it, way back in the Oxford Group days. Okay. All right. He didn't actually write it. He resurrected it out of the archives of the Oxford Group. But it's wonderful. It shows how these AAs, these early alcoholics, sat and listened to God. how they went into meditation, into like a guided prayer and then a meditation, seeking those intuitive thoughts and actions that they should be taking, trying to figure out what to do. And God spoke to them to their intuitive capacity. And they called that the fourth dimension, or the realm of the spirit, where you could actually pick up and listen to God. And sometimes the thoughts weren't from God. And so they put them up against the four absolutes. If the thoughts weren't honest, pure, unselfish, and loving, they didn't consider them coming from God. So, these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity I had never known. Remember, he had a white light experience. He had a spiritual awakening like that. It talks about in the spiritual appendix, most of us have spiritual awakenings of the educational variety. Why did Bill have a quick one? He did the steps while he was detoxing. That's why he had a quick one. Why do we have a slow one? Because we don't do a fourth step till we got 6 months. That's why. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact upon me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed and called my friend the doctor to ask if I was still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. He finally shook his head saying, "Something has happened to you I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." He was dying. The good doctor now sees many men that have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Right then and there is why we're here. Right then and there is why we're here. Because he had this guided thought after a spiritual awakening. He's still detoxing. And he decides to dedicate the rest of his life to alcoholics. And he did. And we're here because of it. But no major changes in your first year. There are a lot of lip-flapping things that go on in Alcoholics Anonymous today, okay? And they're coming from treatment centers and they're coming from lazy sponsors. If it ain't in the big book, it ain't, okay? That's a good rule of thought. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of my demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. This is step 12. Particularly was it imperative to work with others, as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said. And this is where Bill got the idea that he needed to carry the message to other alcoholics. And he started doing it. And for 6 months, he was grabbing people off the bar stool and talking to them about Jesus. And they were saying, you know what I mean? Leave me alone, I'm drinking. It was only until he went out to Akron and he got a little bit of perspective on how to do this and how to explain the hopelessness of your situation and then offer you the spiritual solution that he started to become successful with alcoholics. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. Faith without works is dead. The book of James is in the Bible where faith without works is dead. They almost called Alcoholics Anonymous the James Club. That was one of the names that they were passing around because they used the book of James so much. Dr. Bob read out of the book of James before the big book was around. They used the Bible in the AA meetings for their conference-approved literature. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. Important. I'm going to read this again with emphasis. If an alcoholic fails to perfect and enlarge their spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, they will not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. You'll find a bottle in your hand. Now, if you're a relapser and you've been coming to AA and you've been sitting in the rooms and eating the cookies and drinking the coffee and you're still drinking, my question to you is, what kind of work and self-sacrifice for others are you engaged in? Or are you still on the foundation of selfishness and self-centeredness? What's in AA for me? Okay? You're supposed to drink. if you're not helping other people. You're not likely to, you're supposed to. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. He lived in like 40 different places in the first 5 years of AA, didn't he, John? I mean, he was not going to go back to work. He probably couldn't, but he wasn't. And Lois held like a department store clerk job. She was making probably $2.50 a week, $2.50 a week. And he was running around with his new AA guys all over the place, carrying the message. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. So when you're at a point where you're at a low point in your recovery, you're at a low point, you're hitting a sober bottom, what are you supposed to do? Double up your meetings? No. We don't need you bringing your problems into twice as many meetings. You know what I mean? What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go to the rehabs, the detoxes, the jails, the institutions, and carry the message. If you ain't doing that, you're supposed to drink. Many times I have gone to my old hospital feeling terrible. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for a living that works in tough spots. We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which is a wonderful thing to be a part. It certainly was, because he was the hot shit in it. You know what I mean? He was Bill. Let's go ask Bill. His dream of being number one guy was fulfilled. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I'm telling you, I've got some real pressure on my life today. I have chosen a direction in my life that is really rocky and really rough. But I know I need to be going down that way. 3 years ago, I was making Manhattan money. I walked away from Manhattan money to do something good with my life. And I am not able to monetize it the way I would like to. And I'm really struggling financially. I mean, really struggling financially. More so than I ever was when I was drinking. When I was drinking, I always had a job that paid a paycheck, and I was always able to pay my bills. I am really struggling right now, but I know I'm doing the right thing. And you know what? Even under pressure and difficulty, the joy of living is all over me. I am enjoying every minute on God's wonderful, beautiful, holy earth. I really am. And I'm enjoying every single moment with every single person I'm interacting with. And if I've got some struggles, you know what? In the perspective of things, they really are kind of small. I've seen 100 families set on their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. We have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted. Feuds and bitterness of all sorts have been wiped out. I've seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. He and his boys, because they did a lot of work out of Montclair, he and his boys used to go to Greystone. They used to go to, what's the hospital's name in Montclair? Mountainside. And they used to go in there, and the people that were like rocking, they're still in alcoholic, wet brain almost. They would drag them out to meetings, and and there'd be miracles. And some of these people would regain their standing in the world. They had been locked away in Greystone. Okay, anybody in here ever take a meeting into Greystone? I have. You know what I'm talking about, okay? They were going in there and they were bringing them out to meetings, and some of them were recovering. This is something that you got to experience this. You have to experience it, and this is what he was doing. Business and professional people have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of human misadventure and misery which has not been overcome among us. How is that for a promise? I'm sure all of you go to meetings where the 12 promises are up on the wall, right? Uh-huh. They shortchange you by just giving you 12. Well, here's one right here. Any sort of human misadventure and misery can be overcome. Any sort. This is amazing. In a western city and its environs, there are 60 of us in our families. This was Akron, slowly going out to Cleveland. We often meet informally at our homes so that newcomers may find what they seek. Okay, T. Henry and Clarice Williams had a big-ass old house. And they just used to let the AAs just pile on in. They were Christian people, and they saw that God's work was being done. Why do you think we're in this basement right now? Why do you think the minister of this church said, $10 a week? It costs us $50 just for the heat. Okay. Why do you think we're in this basement? It's because they know God's work is being done down here. They know. And they know some of us will trickle upstairs and become decent church members and, pay, tithe a couple of grand a year. They know it. You know what I'm saying? They know. That's where we are. We're in the church basements. Gatherings of 20 to 60 are common. We are growing in numbers and power. Little did he know. Conservative estimates are there's about 4 million, maybe 5 million sober AA members in the world today. There are a gazillion groups. There are emerging AA areas. You want to get involved in something really, really exciting. Find a country, and with the advent of Facebook and email and cheap airline travel, you can get involved with these countries. I'm involved. I sponsor people in 8 different countries today. Okay, and there are emerging AA areas that are waking up. They're about where we are in the 40s and 50s today, and they can use a little bit of help. They can use a little bit of understanding. They're taking our literature, misunderstanding the shit out of it, and there's all kinds of problems that are going on in these different countries, and they need a little bit of mentorship. They need a little bit of communication with people who have got a lot of experience over here. It's really, really interesting out there. It really is. There are basically secular countries, secular-ass countries. Most of them are atheists. And what's happening is Alcoholics Anonymous is sprouting and people are finding spirituality and they're finding a way to God. It's almost a missionary endeavor, and you weasel your way in there through AA. It's just some really exciting stuff. Listen, your life depends upon being of service, of self-sacrifice to others. Your life depends on it. What I'm telling you is there's a lot of really interesting opportunities out there. There's a lot of really fun things that you can get involved with. Giving a newcomer your phone number at the door is not intensive work with other alcoholics. Intensive, because they ain't going to call you. So you look pretty good at doing it though. Yeah, here's my number. Intensive work with other alcoholics is what they're telling us we need to do. Work and self-sacrifice for others. If you fail to adhere to those spiritual principles, you will not find utter desolation from people in authority. You're going to find it from not adhering to the spiritual principles. And the number one main spiritual principle is, after you've had a spiritual awakening, as a free gift from someone else and from God, you need to carry that to somebody else. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. Find what you're comfortable with. Find what you're good at. Each of us has a set of tools. Some of us aren't any good at going into prisons and carrying the message. Some of us are. Some of us aren't any good on the service committees, the AA service committees. Some of us are. Some of us aren't any good at speaking at conventions or running around like an idiot big shot. Some of us are. Find what you can do and then do it. Because whatever you put into this thing, you're going to get back out tenfold. I can guarantee you that. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see what we beheld. Very non-judgmental. Do not ever get angry at somebody who's drinking. Do not ever get angry at somebody that walks away from this program. Do not. They either cannot or will not. They're not a moron or an idiot. They either cannot or will not. It's a beautiful way to put it. We can't help everybody. What we're supposed to do, read the chapter Working with Others. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to just cultivate prospects. Talk to as many people as you can. Every once in a while, you're going to get a start. In the mid-'90s, I did a lot of work with other people. I was on a mission. And I attracted these relapsers, these people who had been in and out of AA for 20 years. And what happened was they came over to my house, they went through the steps, they recovered from alcoholism, and they started to work with other people. Every single one of them is still sober today. They're card-carrying members in good standing in AA, working with other people, and their quality of life is out the roof. I was able to create a fellowship I craved through intensive work with other alcoholics. And these are guys who would take a bullet for me. They'd give me their last dollar if I needed it. And they tell me that on a constant basis. Do you want that? We all want that. We all want a sense of community, a tight sense of community. It's available. It's available in Alcoholics Anonymous. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some of us would be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity, but just underneath one finds a deadly earnestness. I hope that you find that in the way I speak. I can be humorous at times, but I am deadly ass earnest. This illness kills. And it kills in a horrible way. You would be better off with terminal cancer than with alcoholism. Cancer at least allows you the dignity of setting your affairs in order before you check out. When you check out as an alcoholic or drug addict, you are at the absolute bottom of your existence. The people that still have anything to do with you pity you or resent you, one or the other. Do you want to check out that way in disgrace? I don't. God has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia, nor even for heaven. We have it with us on this good old earth, right here and now. Each day, that simple talk in my kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. John, thank you again for asking me to come up here. This is a great group. I love you guys. Thank you for having me here. Thank you, Frank.